what? I found my Oura ring. Ah! I thought I had lost it. But I hadn't looked under the bed, and that's where it was. So I'm so happy I found it because I was really worried. I put it on payment plans, and I was paying it a month, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where it's at. I think I took it off when I was sleeping, and then I didn't have time to look for it. But I'm so happy I found it. I got a notification that it's charged, so that's why I got reminded about it. So, hi again. I know I'm all over the place, but I'm getting the gist of things, okay? Forgive me if I'm all over the place. But, so, yesterday we talked about the Big Five. Actually, I just went into the first page. The first time Sir Francis Galton came up with the idea that in order to really understand human behavior, we should look into the dictionary. And so in the dictionary, we're gonna find words that describe people. And that eventually, with a lot of help, we're gonna come to words that mean the same thing, that are adjectives that mean the same thing, and it's eventually going to be able to describe the human behavior. So that's when it all started, guys, 1884 with him. And then I like looked him up, right? Because I was like, who's this guy? What else did he do? Was he really that smart? So yeah, he was. He was the first one. What did he do? He, besides that, let me see. He did, he studied eugenics. That's where it started with him. Again, scientific psychology, individual differences, all this other stuff. But I think it's kind of boring to go through everything. Honestly, you probably don't care about that. But I thought it was really interesting just to kind of get an idea of why did he come up with this, like, you know what I'm saying? And why if he just put it out there, people were like, that's a great idea. You know what I mean? Because he had to have some type of, would you say, reputation. He would have to have done other important things for people to look at what that statement and run with it. So he did do a lot of other stuff. And I think the main thing was that he was the first one to bring up eugenics, basically just understanding. I mean, you know, it's kind of like a taboo subject, I think, but it's like he thought that if we kind of looking at the characteristics that make somebody like a better human being. But if you really look at it, that's what people do nowadays with everything that, you know, they can select what kind of donor sperm they have. Like, it's basically, he was the originator of that, because that's really what's been happening, you know. But those are things that sometimes we don't, I know for me, it's not something that I'm like, it's not something that you know unless you're looking for that information. But so he was the first one to, you know, talk about all this stuff. But besides that, he was just a very, very smart man. And he was the founder of psychometrics. So psychometrics is the science of measuring mental abilities. And before him, psychology was mostly philosophical speculation or clinical observation. So philosophical, just like, you know, wise people, basically. You know, you think about these, there's a lot of, I think, like gurus. You think about these people that just know about the world. They just know about human behavior, human beings. So that was philosophy. And I think nowadays there's a lot of people that probably are philosophers, but they don't really name themselves that, right? Because they can be a little bit, what would you say, boastful maybe, if they say I'm a philosopher. Like, so anyways, but and so, or clinical observation. So when fruit and young, that's when they came later. But clinical observation, you go to the therapist and you talk about your problems. But again, there's no one sphere where you can, that maybe a psychologist can say, let me look at this so I can figure out what's wrong with you. So that was the very beginning of psychology. I'm trying to see psychometrics, factor analysis. Okay, standard. All right, so that's him. Psychology, Galton scientific psychology, philosophy, theory. All right, so now 50 years later, okay, so 1884, he said, let's look at the dictionaries. I think that's how we're gonna find really good, important information about human behavior. Nothing happened for 50 years, okay? He just threw it out there, it stayed there. But so 50 years later, this guy, Gordon Allport, in what year? 1936, okay? He is the person that basically, and then another guy named Henry Odbert, but I didn't find a photo of him. And so 50 years later, they took that idea, okay? So they did it with, they took it with the Webster's New International, I think, edition, 1925. Okay, so they went from 500,000 words in the dictionary. And they did it with students, they did it with people that helped them. So they took the idea, identified, and then from 500,000 words, they went down to 18,000 words that described human characteristics. And then after that, they narrowed it down to 4,500 stable trait terms. So words that describe consistent ways people behave, think, and feel. And I was wondering, I was like, I know one of the things that I wondered is like, how did he say, let me do that? You know what I mean? I'm like, what motivated him to actually do that? And so Allport, this guy, he was a psychologist who believed personality should be studied scientifically, not just through Freudian psychoanalysis, right? So Freud would just talk about childhood and talk therapy to resolve inner conflict. And so he thought it has to be data driven. He believed we need to look at data in order to analyze people and behavior. So that's why he did it. He was driven by that. And then let's see. So okay, so let's see. So they employed several researchers and undergrad and grad students from Harvard, I believe. So if the word could be used in a sentence, this is how they did it. He, she is very, and then the word, or he, she is a word, personality, and it describes stable characteristics, not just temporary state like drunk or physical trait like tall. It made the cut. So I think they also talked about how they didn't want anything to be moral, right? So if you're describing somebody, they didn't want it to say, oh, that person's a good person, that person's a bad person, because that's very objective. You can't really, it depends on how you view the world. You know, it doesn't really describe somebody distinctively, right? So that's another thing that I know that they're very, the Big Five is very, what would you say it? Very, not smart, that's not the word, just precise in the words that they use to categorize human behavior, because they didn't want it to be moral. They wanted to get away from that, because in a way that's kind of what philosophy also does, right? It talks about, I think, and if you look at the Bible, it's philosophy, so the Bible is all about, I think, morality and stuff like that. So they wanted something different than that. Because that's another thing that I always wondered. Once I got farther into studying this, I always wondered, Jung, J-U-N-G, Jung, I wondered why. I learned throughout studying that at one time he went through an awakening and a spiritual enlightenment process. But he kept it to himself. It's called the Red Book. If you look it up on YouTube, you'll find a bunch of information about it. And I wondered, I said, but why did he not share it? Why did he keep it to himself? And I'm like, my gosh, that must have been so hard for him to just go through go through that, go through enlightenment, go through all of this, and then have to keep it to himself. That must have been so difficult. But the reason that that happened is because during the time that Freud was, Freud and Jung was young, talking about unconscious, talking about, the unconscious mind was so taboo. Because it went back to Bible. It went kind of back to philosophy, back to just this thing that you couldn't grasp. It's like somebody's going to talk about enlightenment, somebody's going to talk about their unconsciousness, it's not data driven. So when psychology came about, it was more about being driven by data, not being driven by philosophy or somebody talking about, human behavior and just in general terms. They wanted actual numbers to pertain to behavior. So because I know that was one of the things that I always wondered, because I've always been interested in psychology, always, but thank the Lord I didn't do any of that in college, because I probably would have been, I would have not been like a good counselor. Or why? Because I wouldn't have been able to establish boundaries. I think it would have been really hard for me to do that at that time. So anyways, so we are here with Gordon Allport, right? And let's see what else. Screen personality, no shortcuts. Oh, and also there is no computers and no shortcuts. So they actually, these students and him and the work that it led, they actually had to go through the dictionary and like work together and do it, all by their, I guess there's no shortcuts, there's no computers. Okay, conclusion of the paper. So the conclusion in the end after he did was that the English language contains a huge but a finite number of terms for describing personality. So he did come with the conclusion that yes, what Mr. Sir, or what he proposed, so what he ended up finding out through all of this, and again, I mean, imagine, I don't know, I just admire, like taking on this project and saying, I'm gonna do this. Like, I just find that so inspiring. So what he proposed 50 years later, Mr. Allport, he said, yes, that is true. Like, I have come to a conclusion that yes, there's a lot of words, but we can come up with a finite number of terms for describing personality. So it's true. So the list was served as raw material for scientific taxonomy of traits. Okay, and coined the term 1963. Did I? Okay, coined the term. I think, did he coin the term? Okay, so let me see. Yes, I think he did. That's why but I think I did it wrong. No, 1936. Okay, so whenever I started talking about the Big Five, there is this term that's called lexical hypothesis. And I'd be like, what is that? What does that even mean? So what happened is that when Sir Francis Galton, when he just proposed the idea, let's look at the dictionary, and I think that by doing this, we're gonna find words to describe human behavior. He just threw that out there, okay? He didn't coin anything, he just put it out there of, just said, this is an idea that, I think would be good. So whenever Allport did that, 50 years later when he did that, he also coined the term lexical hypothesis. So he means, what lexical hypothesis means is that when you basically grab words and you grab the words and you do that. You take a number of words and then you narrow them down like that. That's what lexical hypothesis means. The most important individual differences in human personality are encoded in the natural language that people use every day. Lexical hypothesis, that's what it means. The most important individual differences in human personality are encoded in the natural language that people use every day. So in order to understand human behavior, we have to look at the language that we use every day, because that way we are describing other people, we're describing ourselves. So human behavior has to be contained within our language. And so later on, lexical studies came about. It's a research method in personality psychology that starts with the words people actually use to describe each other. So again, I'm gonna reiterate it because I need to be reminded. I did this a few weeks ago and I'm like, I don't remember everything precisely. So lexical studies, a research method in personality psychology that starts with the words people actually use to describe each other. That's lexical studies. All right, so let's see. Is there anything other information on there? Okay, so that was in 1936. All right, 1936, that's what he did. He went from 500,000 words to 4,500,000 words to, no, 500,000 words to 18,000 words to 4,500,000 words. All right. This is so like amazing. All right, so he said, there is the information. I did my part. You know, let this be whatever it becomes. So he left it at that, right? So now, in 1940, which is really only 4 years later, I didn't find a picture, I don't think. In 1940, 4 years later, Raymond Cattell, oh, I did find a photo. He's over here. Look at him. Raymond Cattell, okay, 4 years later, he took the 4,500 words, okay, and reduced it to, you know how many he reduced it to? 16 words. Oh my gosh, 16 words, okay? Took 4,500 words that this researcher, okay, so now think about this. It went from 500,000 words to 18,000 words to 4,500,000 words to 16 words. Right? And you're like, what? It's like, I'm like, it's just like, what? It's like you have like, if you really understand this, it's like you have an architectural map of human behavior, okay? So, all right, so Raymond Cattell, so he did that. He believed personality could be quantified like physical traits. His motivation was scientific rigor. He was driven to make psychology a hard science, not just clinical observation. So that is why during this time, they wanted to study psychology, human behavior as a science. They wanted data, they wanted numbers. They didn't want abstract ideas of seeing the world. They wanted something that could be that could be used with human populations, you know? Because I think with philosophy, when you read even self-help, let's say, you know, you read these things and yes, they are motivating, but then sometimes when you read self-help, you're like, but why can't I do that? You know, I know there was a time in my life that I was so into self-help and I loved self-help, but then I would try to do certain things that they would say, you just have to believe in yourself, or you just have to do this, or you just have, and then I'd get down on myself because I'd be like, oh, maybe I don't believe in myself enough, or maybe I'm missing something, you know? So the reason that psychology wanted to be driven by science is because by looking at data, we can actually see, like we can look at truth, okay? Data equals truth. Clinical observations are just what clinicians see with their clients, but data can be used all across populations, right? So I'm trying to think. Actually, I think this Sir Francis Galton, did he create the, I don't know. Anyways, I'm just gonna keep going. He was the first person was very important. You guys can look it up if you want more information, but he was actually very important in history. All right, so Raymond Cattell, I'll show you again the picture. Mr. Cattell. He went from 4,500,000 words to 16 words, okay? And so his motivation was that he wanted to make psychology a hard science, not just clinical observation. So he was the first person where factor analysis came in. So what is factor analysis? Factor analysis is a method that was just becoming powerful enough for this scale of data. Okay, let me see what, I forget what factor analysis is, guys. I'm not like, I think it's when you take 60, I don't know, just look it up, what factor analysis. I'm not gonna do all of that. But he's the first person to, and I think with factor analysis, you take a bunch of data and then you figure out which one is the same thing as something else. So that way you can like hone it down. So by doing factor analysis, he ended up with 16 primary personality factors. And I think the only reason he was able to do it maybe was because he used computers at that time. I'm not sure, maybe I'm making that up. But basically, but think about this, it doesn't matter. 4,500,000 words to 16 words, okay? So when he created the 16 words, that's when he created the first ever test for people to use. Okay. So his motivation again, create a tool that can practically predict behavior in clinics, workplaces, education. So that was the motivation. Like, I want to be able to help people. And how can I help people? By creating this that can actually predict behavior. We want to predict behavior. Okay, so again, just wanted to predict behavior so that we can use this in clinics, workplaces, and education. He wanted something that could be testable, not philosophical. You know, like testable, not philosophical. His mentor, one of his mentors of Raymond Cattell was Charles Spearman. And he's the one, I don't have a picture of him, but he's the one that invented factor analysis. So he worked with Spearman, and I think he was able to come down to 16 words because he worked with the creator of factor analysis. So mentor Charles Spearman is the one that created the G factor, the S factor. Another person that's super interesting. And do you see this? Like, do you see how people that are just wizards in mathematics can actually also show us the beauty of human behavior? Like that's just amazing to me. You know, so let me see. His own drive for precision, he wanted a model that was mathematical, replicable, and useful. Okay, and then I have this little note, and I don't have everything highlighted, but this is what's highlighted. And I have this little thing, a note to myself. This is what I also needed, okay? And I'm gonna talk to you about this. Again, I'm gonna go back to when you grow up and you feel so much. You feel so much, and everyone around you doesn't feel this. Everyone around you doesn't feel what you feel, doesn't have these strong emotions. So then you start questioning yourself. You start saying, am I the problem? Am I too sensitive? Am I too much? I just need to be tougher. Like, I just need to be like tougher. I need to be a tougher person. And I am gonna be 40 this year. I'm 39, I turned 40 in August. But I'm gonna say for 40 years, right? For 40 years, I lived with this idea because I always felt everything. I always knew when somebody didn't like me. I could tell when somebody didn't really like me. I could tell when somebody was stressed. I could tell when somebody was, I could just read people. Like I couldn't tell you I could read people like, oh, you're going through, nothing like I'm a psychic, but I could tell how people felt about me. I could always tell. And sometimes people would, their behavior, I would say, I would take it personally. I would say, oh, they don't like me because of me. They don't like, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I don't know, whatever. I would blame myself for how they felt, okay? And then on top of that, you add that anytime you try to talk to someone about your feelings, they would say, you're just making too much of a big deal about that. Like, it's really not that serious. Like, I didn't feel that. You felt that? And so it's not just one person. Imagine that your entire life, people have told you, and I'm not going to say like every single time, of course, right? Maybe there would be some instances in between those 40 years that somebody would say, oh yeah, I felt that too, but in general, people would just be like, you're a crazy girl. Like, I didn't feel that. Like, really? You felt that? Is that true? And then sometimes you just stop sharing. You stop sharing your feelings because you're like, I'm the problem. You start thinking you're the problem. You start thinking, I am the problem. I am just too naive. I'm just too nice. I'm just too much. Okay? Like, I'm just too much. Like, I just need to be tougher. I need to be a tougher person. But what would happen to me is that I couldn't be a tougher person. I couldn't. I tried. But then when I was actually like mean, but I thought my version was mean, like I could do it for maybe a day or something, but then I would feel horrible. I would feel horrible the next day. I would feel like, what happened to me? That's not who I am. That's not who I am. And this is what it reminds me of my first job after college. I worked at a bank, a big bank. And I've always hated sales. I hated sales. But I remember I worked at this bank and I was a banker, so I had to open up checking accounts, savings accounts, credit cards, blah, blah, blah. And they micromanaged your butt like no other. And you would have to be aggressive. You had to, now I understand what you had to do. You basically had to not really care about the person that was sitting in front of you. You just had to figure out if you could get anything out of them. You'd have to get anything out of them. You'd be like, well, can maybe, so, and then the funny thing is that when you're a banker, like people like sometimes tell you their whole story. Like sometimes you'll sit there and they just talk and talk and talk and then, at that time I didn't know how to like end conversations. Sometimes I'd feel bad that I have to like cut them off or something. And I remember my manager said, hey, you really just need to learn how to like stand up and say, just like cut people off. Like not like in a super unpolite way, but they're wasting your time. You're really not going to get anything out of them. You're really not. And oh my gosh, I hated that job. I hated it with all my heart. I hated that job. But I was living by myself at the time. And, I was like, no, I'm going to do it for the money. I thought it was the first time that I learned that I like money. Everybody likes money. You need money to survive and to live. But money does not motivate me. Money does not motivate me. I was so stressed out. And let me tell you another thing that I had to do at the bank. I had to open up checking accounts. There is some customers that deal with cash, like especially I think lower income customers. And I think that's actually really smart now that I'm like, I have some credit card debt. I'm like, that's actually really smart to just deal with cash. I mean, except now there's places that don't take cash, which is bullcrap. But, at that time, cash was still, everywhere acceptable. And so some people just needed a savings account. They really didn't need, they just wanted, they went to their job. They wanted to like cash their check and have it in a savings account. But no, I had to push the check. the checking account. Because why? Because that's the debit cards is where banks make money, because you use it, and so they charge the transaction fee and all of that. And I remember I would have to convince people. I felt like I was taking advantage of people. I felt like you need a savings account. You don't need a checking account, but I have to sell you on the checking account. I had to go against what I knew was best for the person, and I hated doing that. I hated it. And I remember I just couldn't, like, when I would go to that bank with like just that, you know, when you have this like a ball in your gut, like you're just like, oh, I don't want to be here. I remember going to that bank and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I hate this job, but I have to stay here because I have to pay my bills and all of that. Well, it got really bad to where I just said, you know what, forget this, I'm done. I was like, I don't care if I have to work whatever job, I don't care. I'm not gonna be here anymore. So what I did is that I borrowed some money from a friend, because I still was living by myself in the apartment, and I was, again, getting in debt at that time. And I was like, but I can't, like, I couldn't. I said, I'd rather do anything else than do this. I was like, I cannot feel like I'm taking advantage of people. I can't do it. I was like, I can't do it. And that's when I used to think, why can't I be tougher? Why can't I be more aggressive? I remember thinking to myself, I need to be more aggressive. I just need to be like, you know, and I'd be like, why do I care so much? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, just sell. And people would say that, just sell. Like, and I'd be like, but I can't. I really want to, because I remember during this time, it's like to be successful, you have to be aggressive. You have to like be, you know, this go-getter woman, this like career woman, and I'd be like, oh gosh, I'd be like, I can't do it. I want to do it, but I can't do it. So at that time, I ended up quitting that job, and I was like, forget it. I was like, I'm not gonna do this. I'm done selling my soul. That's what I felt. And it's not even worth it. I was like, it's not worth it for whatever money I made. I was like, forget it. I don't care. I'd rather work anywhere else than here, you know? And so I borrowed money until I was able to like get out of my apartment. And after that, I moved back home, and I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I was like, this is the worst. And then after I left that job, I would have nightmares that I had to go back. I had nightmares. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember dreaming, not here again. I thought I left this job. I like hated it with a passion. So I'll go back to what I was talking about. So his drive, Cattell wanted something that was mathematical, replicable, and useful. And this is what I also needed. I'll go back to my feelings. All my life, I've been told that I feel too much, that I'm too sensitive, that if I was just tougher, I would probably be more successful. And I knew that. I was like, I'm just not. And so whenever I came across this information in psychology, this is what I also needed. I also needed what I was finding out, what I was figuring out, to be all of this. I needed this precision. I needed this history. I needed to know that what now I understand is not it just in my head, like not just in my heart. Like now I can see the data, and I can look at somebody's data and I can understand them. Like, and I am just like, so this is also what I needed. So Cattell published his work. Mr. Cattell published his work in, when did he publish the work? In 1949 to 1950, okay? And it was the first major trait model with real measurement power. So it was the first time since 1884, right? Since 1884, says Mr. Sir Galton Francis, it was the first time that there was actually a model that could do this. I'm trying to do the math here. I'm gonna tell you. Okay, so 1884 to 1949. Okay, let me see how many years later. 65 years later. That's amazing. 65 years later, what Mr. Sir Francis Galton, I probably don't have to say Mr., but what Sir Francis Galton thought it became. And I'm just like, wow, human beings are just amazing. I mean, can you imagine? That's so amazing. 65 years later. All right. So he published it, and then when he published it, I'm trying to figure out. Collected data. So I guess okay. So so bear with me, okay? I'm trying to like go back to this. So in order to actually get to the 16 model, he collected data over 10,000 people. So from across several years, from 1930s to 1940s. So in order to get to the 16, from the 4,500 to the 16, he needed to collect data from people. He needed to, I don't know how he collected the data. I don't have that information, but over 10,000 people. So for 10 years, he collected data. It took him 10 to 15 years to get to the 16. Can you imagine having so much curiosity to do this for 10 to 15 years? I'm just like, to get to the 16, right? So Cattell was obsessed with factor analysis. He was so obsessed with this that he named his daughter Psyche, short for psychology. I thought that was cute. Isn't that funny? Okay, so in 1949, he published the 16. So after 10 to 15 years, he published the first test the psychologists could actually use. Personality psychology. So this is where we get personality psychology. Okay. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to finish after this. It's about 40 minutes now. I think this is enough for today. So I'm going to read you the 16, okay? So the 16, and I think some people still use this. So the first one is warmth. When you're high in warmth, you're warm, outgoing, affectionate, trusting. When you're low on warmth, you're reserved, detached, aloof, and critical. Second word, reasoning. If you're high, abstract thinking, bright, quick learner. If you're low, concrete thinking, less intellectually sharp. Emotional stability. High, you're calm, emotionally stable, mature. Low, reactive, emotionally unstable, easily upset. Dominance. High, assertive, dominant, competitive, forceful. Low, differential, submissive, cooperative. Liveliness. High. Number 5. Enthusiastic, cheerful, energetic, spontaneous. Low. Serious, restrained, sober, taciturn. I don't know how to pronounce that one. 6. Rule consciousness. High. Conscientious, dutiful, moralistic, rule-bound. Low. Expedient, non-conforming, disregards rules. Number 7. Social boldness. High. Socially bold, venturesome, thick-skinned. Low. Shy, timid, threat sensitive. Number 8, sensitivity. High, tender-minded, sensitive, sentimental, aesthetic. Low, tough-minded, unsentimental, realistic. Vigilance. Number 9, high, suspicious, skeptical, distrustful. Low, trusting, accepting of others. Abstractness, high, abstract, imaginative, absent-minded. Low, grounded, practical, down to earth. Privateness, high, private, discreet, self-contained. Low, forthright, open, genuine. Number 12, apprehension, high, apprehensive, self-doubting, guilt-prone. Low, self-assured. Number 13, openness to change, high, openness to change, experimental, liberal. Low, traditional, conservative, attached to familiar. 14, self-reliance, high, self-reliant, solitary, self-sufficient. Low, group-oriented, affiliative, follower. Number 15, perfectionism, high, perfectionism, self-discipline, organized. Low, tolerates disorder, flexible, undisciplined. And then number 16, high, tense. 16, tension, high, tense, driven, high energy, overwrought. Low, relaxed, placid, low drive. Guys, okay, we went from 500,000 words in the dictionary, narrowed down to 18,000 words, narrowed down to 4,500,000 words, narrowed down with factor analysis, and after 15 years, and after doing data from 10,000 people, we get 16. Okay, 16 personality factors that describe human behavior. Warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, tension. Do you see this? We went from 500,000 words to 18,000 words to 4,500,000 words to 16 words that describe human behavior. And from 16 words, we went down to 5. Okay? Do you see this? Do you see the beauty of this? Do you understand my excitement? Since I was a little girl, I wanted to understand why people did what they did. Why? I would see homeless people on the street and I would think, why? Why are you homeless? What happened to you? What happened to you in your life? What happened? You know, I would see people. I remember reading a book about a lady in Africa whenever they were doing what was happening? There were like 2 groups of people that were killing each other. And she survived. And you know, she wrote a book. And I'm like, why is it that some people, they go from something so horrific and they still end up being successful? And why do some people, I would think about celebrities. I would think about celebrity kids and I would think, why are you like, why? Sorry, I had to get my taller or something. Like I would always question, like, what makes a child depressed? What makes a child that has everything materialistically, why is he so sad? You know? And I finally understand why. And I finally understand why through the Big 5. And that is why I want to share it with you, because it's just amazing. It's amazing. So I finally understand the why. I finally understand the why. So that is why I want to share it with you, because I think that you also want to understand the why. And I'm so excited that God put this in my path, and so many puzzle pieces that I had my entire life have come together. And it took 40 years, you know? And so I am just so happy, and I am, and this again, is something for me and for God. You know, it's for me and for God. And also I hope that with it, I'm able to help you. And I'm able to help you if you ever felt like you were so lost in the world because you don't understand why you're the way that you are, you know? And yeah, I get teary because because it took me 40 years, you know? So, bye.